Namaste. My name is Saurabh Nanda, and welcome to another episode of Such Conversations Matter. Today, I feel proud and privileged to have Mr. Terrie Lloyd on my show. Terrie is a serial entrepreneur. He originally comes from New Zealand. He migrated to Australia first, and then in the 80s, he moved to Japan, and he has been there since, having almost lived 4 decades in Japan, and more interestingly, having started 20 companies. He has started companies in IT, in technology, networking, DVDs, publishing, recruitment, and most recently, tourism. And he plans to open more companies in the future. And that is why Terrie's entrepreneurial journey, his life's adventure, is something which all of us can learn from. And that's what we're going to discuss in today's episode about Terrie, what he does, why he does, how he does it, what is his magical touch, and what he thinks about Japan and the future. So, not wasting any more time, let me welcome Terrie to the show. Hi, Terrie, how are you?
I'm very well, thank you. It's a relatively nice day here in Tokyo.
Well, that's great.
Had a small break this morning.
And that's good news to hear. So,
Sure.
You have this immense. I still remember, when Elizabeth introduced us to you that today we have somebody really special, Terrie Lloyd, coming to us, and I remember checking out your LinkedIn profile that day before the lecture, and I saw that you have this immense portfolio of companies which you started, and they range in so many different domains, from IT to recruitment, tourism, like currently tourism, and then a lot of publishing as well. How do you choose which sectors to get into?
Um, so I go by gut instinct, basically. When I first got into business, my first company, which I started with my ex-wife, I'm now married a second time, we started a company that was in the translation space. At that time, because she knew translation, that was her world, and because I was one of the few foreigners in Japan who knew what a PC was. This is back in 1983, so it was going back quite a ways. And so together as a team, we were rather unique in Japan, and we were able to get plenty of business. The companies that came after that, some of them were accidental, but most of the best ones came because of a crisis, an existential crisis. And in having a crisis, I was forced to think at very base levels, not about how to make money, not about how to improve my social status, but simply how to survive. And in choosing each company, to be honest, I would meditate on it. In fact, when I was 15, I actually had lessons in transcendental meditation. So I've been a fan of Indian culture ever since I've been a teenager, and I've been very close to India over the years. So I feel that our path in life is not defined by our brain. It's defined by our destiny, which is mostly heart. You can feel what's right and what's wrong. Now, some people may think that a difficult career or a difficult setback is a negative thing. But in my books, every point scored in the game of life is a point worth earning. So, there is nothing too difficult because it's supposed to be overcome, and each time you overcome, you've achieved another step forward. So anyway, that has been my philosophy in life in discovering those businesses. I have to say that I get bored. If I was a young person, again, probably I would be treated for ADHD. I find it very difficult to focus on one thing, so I like to do 3 or 4 companies at the same time. And in the last 10 or 15 years, have chosen the fields that I want to be in. Originally, the fields chose me because opportunities came along. But more recently, I've just I've meditated. I've thought about where the world is going. I've followed my heart. It's always been difficult to start with in each company, but slowly bit the curtains unfold and reveal an amazing world beyond. And so that's happened both with this travel business and also with a medical technology business that I have been an investor in for a long time, and I'm currently helping them with funding. I'm already planning my next business, which will happen in 3 or 4 years' time. I've discovered fermentation, and I've become extremely interested in the effects of fermentation on your biome, your intestinal health, and from your gut health, your brain health. There are connections between the health of your biome and Alzheimer's,
Right.
And a number of other so-called lifestyle diseases. So, I would like to actually create products which help people and help society. And in fact, to be honest, most of my businesses over the last 15 years have been revolving around helping people.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, it's nice to make money as well, but I have a philosophy which I share in all my business classes, and that is that money follows quality.
Mm.
So if you follow your heart and do whatever you do to the best of your ability, the money will find you.
Well, that's very interesting, and this is a trend that we can observe in a lot of entrepreneurs, that they do follow their gut a lot. They do follow their gut feeling a lot. So how do you deal with data when, let's say, you're in an industry or you're starting a company which might not be, according to the data published by a lot of these people, B schools and regulatory bodies and all those, how do you manage if the data is not favoring you? How do you make a trade-off there?
Well, it depends what part of the business cycle you're in. If you're developing your idea and your first business, you ignore the data. Data is what everybody else reads. Mm. So if you want to follow the data, you will only be as good as 1,000 other people who have the same idea and the same interest. Maybe you're a bit more foolish and jumping in and starting the business, whereas most other people just read the data. But nonetheless, you're guaranteeing that if you follow the flow, you will have competition. Mm-hmm. So I've never been big on data at the start of the cycle. Once the cycle has started, once I've chosen the direction I want to go, remember I'm anticipating where the business is going to be 5 years from now. So generally speaking, there is no data. Mm-hmm. Instead, it's a basis of human nature, previous experience, gut feeling, accidental discoveries, connections with other people in other markets who have seen something similar. I mean, there are all kinds of signposts to point you in the right direction. The best time to start a company usually is at the bottom of the market. So if you look at the data, the bottom of the market usually is the end of the world. So nobody in their right mind would start a company then. But in fact, that's the best time to start a company because then you can only go up.
Right.
So, of course, once the business is in motion, then data becomes important, partly because your role itself changes, right? I mean, you start from being a founder, a creator, an inventor. You go on to be a manager, a motivator, and a coach. What does that mean? It means there are other people in the business, and those people may not meditate, and they may not have the same sort of core connection to the universe that you do as a founder. So, for those people, yes, they need data. And by that time, of course, the business has already started, it's got its differentiation, hopefully it's going to converge with the market trends in 3 to 4 years' time, having already been run for a couple of years. And then in that case, data becomes important.
Okay. So you said something very interesting, Terrie, and thank you for that answer. So data is all about science, and we can talk about it in a scientific way. And what you said, an entrepreneur goes with his gut feeling and connects different people from different markets, and so it's more like an art, right? And so, what exactly would you define yourself as? As an artist who uses science later on, or as somebody who's defined his own science when it comes to starting new things?
Um, that is actually a very good question. There is a definite method and methodology to making a successful company. So let me say that being an entrepreneur is not about ignoring business fundamentals, but we're talking about where is that vein of gold, right? And you're up on the ground. You can't see the gold because it's under the ground. You have to guess where it is. So the normal thing is to go around and probe for it. But, there are particular types of people called dowsers. Generally, they're looking for water rather than gold. But dowsers have an uncanny ability to be able to find that water because they can feel it. Actually, I've had a practical experience of somebody doing that on a property that I owned, which had no apparent source of water. And lo and behold, he found water about 800 feet down. From that point of view, I think that basically an entrepreneur at the start is something like that dowser. You just feel it. You know that you're on the right track.
Mm-hmm. All right. So human beings are generally creatures who learn from experience, right? We're very bad at learning from our past mistakes. I'm talking about from previous generations. And we like to learn...
Not previous lives, previous generations.
Our ancestors, right? We have documented history of we making a lot of mistakes, but we still end up doing the same mistakes. So humans love learning from experience. We fall down, we get up, and we love learning from experience. So has your journey been more like that only, or you have also learned from other people's experiences, from history's experiences? Does that differentiate you in any kind? Because otherwise, there should have been more people like you starting 20 companies, but they're not.
Yeah, right. So, my philosophy about life is that it's only one of many lives. But for this life, we should do the best we can. I happened to discover early how to make a company, build it, sell it. And so I made that into a lifestyle. So my lifestyle is building and selling companies. Some companies, I like them well enough that I would keep doing them. Other ones, I'm not particularly interested in, I sell them. I really like the travel business, so I imagine I would be in the travel business for quite some time. In starting 17 companies here in Japan, I don't see it as a measure of success. It's a measure of lifestyle. And some people choose to live on the beach. Some people go surfing. Some people write code. I start companies. I don't think it's anything special, to be honest. You're asking me what I've learned along the way. I've learned to listen. I've learned to watch. I've learned to trust. I'm a big believer in trust. I believe that we should all accept what the universe has to give to us. And then the bad people, the bad things, will sort themselves out. They will make themselves obvious. You just stay alert and just watch. But I never block. I never block requests. If I have the time, I will do what people are asking me. Because you never know. We all connect. Like I'm doing the show with you. Right. Somebody might be watching and think, hey, I want to contact that guy and see if he will look at my software or employ my son or whatever, I think it's really, really important that we live our lives fully. And that's all I've been doing. Some people create companies so that they can be $1 billion business. And all the more power to them. I have some friends who started at the same time I did when I was on my first company, who are now billionaires. I'm certainly not a billionaire. But it's not to say I've been unsuccessful. I've had a few successes. But I really like the startup phase. I like the creative phase. And I like people, I like getting them excited. I hire people who get excited about what we're doing and then let them go for it and learn that they're bigger than themselves. So I never hire people for jobs. I hire jobs for people. in reverse.
Wow, that's such an amazing statement. So entrepreneurship is a lifestyle. You choose it, and you live through it. That's amazing. So, Terry, since you have experienced so much in life, which moment in your life would you call your crowning glory, or as an artist, maybe your magnum opus? What would which moment would you choose from your life?
For business, there is none
Okay.
because a business is only as good as the next economic cycle.
Hmm.
Much the same as sickness is a definition of health. Financial health is a definition of the next economic cycle. The special times in my life would have been the birth of my children. And I'm one of the few people to have swum on the top of Ayers Rock in the middle of the Australian desert.
Wow.
And not many people know that Ayers Rock has large holes at the top. And the time that I was there, it rained. And I was swimming in one of the holes, which was about the length of a 50-meter swimming pool. So I swam on the top of Ayers Rock, looking out over the desert and the baking sun. It was a very surreal experience.
Wow.
Nothing to do with business.
Nothing to do with business. So,
and
yeah.
If I could just say, that experience, why is that a memorable experience? Because as you can imagine, the sky was a brilliant blue.
Mm-hmm.
The desert was an ochre red, and the water was extremely chill and very refreshing. My body, my senses were completely alive. And when I start a new company, when I find a really great employee and watch them grow, and by the way, they're not really employees, they're friends, they're co-workers. But as I watch them grow, I get that same feeling, the color of life is so powerful. I mean, you're wearing a really delightful pink shirt, and behind you, all these amazing colors. So you've got a small bonsai on one side and some books on the other. Colors in life, you can live those colors. And that's what I'm doing by starting companies. I'm living the colors of those companies.
Wow, that's such a nice statement.
I'm not on a drugs, by the
way. I believe you.
Okay, good. I'm not Elon Musk.
I don't think we need more Elon Musks. I mean, I have great respect for that guy, but one is enough, I guess, for now. All right. So, Terry, and I know this question has been asked to you a million times at least since 1983 when you first came to Japan. Why Japan?
Accident. Basically, I went to a friend's dinner. He had just come back from Japan. He was the first wave of working holiday visas between Australia and Japan. And I was a strict vegetarian. And I couldn't eat anything at the table. So I picked up some rice and walked down fish, meat, fish. And then at the end, there was some pickles. So I got a selection of pickles, and there's this one particular pickle that was extremely piquant, and after eating that, I thought, wow, this is amazing. Maybe I should just go to Japan. So it was as simple as that. I wanted a change. I ate this pickle, and I went to Japan. And about 6 months after arriving in Japan, I found out that pickle, which is called kimchi, isn't from Japan, it's from Korea. I came to the wrong country. So, I'm really a weed in the sidewalk. It doesn't matter which country I'm in, which environment. If there's a little crack for somebody like me to grow, I will grow. Mm-hmm. And that's exactly what happened. And then once I got here, I found it was an immense challenge. It was exciting. It was everything that I really wanted out of life, which is the color, the challenge, and the potential.
Wow. So when you came to Japan, and obviously it has been a challenge, as you said, but what were the advantages that Japan offered that probably Australia and New Zealand did not offer you?
Not many. Not much. Australia and New Zealand are pretty desirable locations for people to live in. the reason why I love Japan so much is because of the people and the food and the history and the traditions and the crafts and the fact that people are very sincere, sincerity, the honesty. So it's the whole package. There's no one particular thing. People who are non-Japanese arriving in Japan go through 2 or 3 phases. Initially, when they come to Japan, they love it to death, and they want to stay as long as they can. Then after about 2 years, it drives them crazy because of all the rules and regulations and expectations. Then after about 5 years, they've decided that they either want to, create a revolution or leave the country. And after 10 or 15 years, they start to get it, and they find out that they want to stay long term and be part of it. So basically, I would say that obviously I fit in the latter category. I've become used to the country. I figured out how it works. There's still things that drive me crazy.
Right. So, I spent very little time in Japan last year, around 10 months, and I was in AYF, so it was a very different scenario. And what I understand is, so Japan initially is kind of challenging, as you rightly pointed out, for a lot of non-Japanese to settle down there. So is it the challenge itself which keeps you going as well? No, I'm going to make it here. I'm definitely going to make it here, or I'm going to prove to people that I made it in Japan. Is that part of the motivation which keeps a lot of people like you who live in Japan and love Japan going?
It's a very deep country, and so there's always something to learn and explore. I'm not sure that I had anything to prove to anybody else. I certainly wasn't trying to prove it to my family, because originally I'm from New Zealand, and going to Australia would have been good enough. It's just an incredibly fascinating country, and there are centers of expertise and learning and that kind of thing, which if you tap into them, you could go for several lifetimes quite happily. So I would say that for most people who are motivated and living here, of course there's the whole thing around safety, your family, once you have a family, they can live peacefully and grow up and, participate in society. But as an individual, the ability to be able to learn and grow is really incredible. And, I've been here 36 years. I'm still learning every single day.
Mm-hmm. Wow, that sounds amazing, actually. So, a lot of foreigners, as you said, they come here for the food, they come here for the culture, they come here for the immersion. You like Japan because of the sincerity of people. Are there any other reasons which attract foreigners to go and live in Japan?
Yeah, anime, manga, drift car racing, the music scene, kendo, ikebana, jiu-jitsu, karate, aikido. The list is long. There are many things to do here.
Talking about drift car racing, have you ever seen drift car racing in Japan yourself?
I personally have not, but I have clients who come in and we rent a drift car race track for them and arrange for them to get some teachers and cars. They spend the whole day dragging around the track. Yeah,
oh, that's amazing because so my biggest popular culture exposure to Japan was this Hollywood movie called Fast and Furious Tokyo Drift.
Fast and Furious, yeah.
And I thought, okay, so that's Japan. I was never into Pikachu or anime or any other things. And when I reached Japan and I started talking to other Japanese students and people, and I told them, "Have you seen Tokyo Drift?" And they said, "What? We haven't really heard of the movie." Which I later discovered that most of the shooting was done not in Japan but in South Korea, and it was just a very Hollywood version of Japan, which was fiction. So does that happen a lot, that people have this idea of Japan and then they come to Japan and that idea is completely busted because what they see is completely different from what they imagined?
Oh, absolutely. My impression before I came to Japan was that there were old houses with rice paper walls and doors, and I was shocked when I arrived in Tokyo to see all the concrete. Definitely people get a certain view of Japan that turns out to be misleading. Actually, when I was a kid, we used to watch a movie, a cartoon series called Hashimoto Mouse, which was a little mouse that was kind of a ninja expert and always fighting the nasty neighborhood cat. So I got a very strong impression from that about what Japan would be like. Yeah, I was incredibly shocked to find out that Japan is quite different.
Wow, amazing. So I think we can keep talking about Japan and it'll be hours before we know it. So I'm going to quickly move on to the next question, which actually comes from what you said once in the lecture that you gave us on Awaji. You said that you tell most of your friends in a very business kind of a context about Japan that Japan is like a Disneyland. You keep discovering new things. Tell us more about that.
Yeah, it is like a Disneyland. It's quite interesting, in that Japan is technologically advanced, it's educationally advanced, and yet it's gone on a completely different track from the West. So Westerners in particular are either fascinated or frustrated by the similarities or the achievements, and yet the seemingly totally different world that Japanese operate in. So, when I talk about a Disneyland, what I'm really saying is that the skill of Disney is to create a crowded space where under normal conditions you would be extremely unhappy to be there because you're lining up for hours and hours for one attraction. But they've managed to create little nooks and crannies that people can discover and keep them entertained and occupied while they're waiting or while they're taking a break in between the attractions. And Japan is something similar to that.
Right.
So, you walk down a street with lots and lots of concrete, and then suddenly you'll turn a corner and there's a little old house that's been there for 200 years. And still, the people inside that house are trading pickles or something like that, just like they would have been back in the 1800s.
Right.
Actually, just along those lines, I went out to the region around Tokyo to the north, which is kind of the breadbasket for Tokyo, and visited a soy factory which was established 390 years ago. Now, you think that's amazing. The guy who runs it is the 18th generation of the founding family. That family has been running that factory for 390 years. Isn't that amazing?
It is amazing. And actually that brings me to a very interesting question. I hadn't thought of this, but so I read once that one of the oldest hotels in the world is in Japan. And even today, just like you said, 18th generation for that soy factory, it is also being run from the same family. So maybe it's 40th generation or something. As a human being, you crave change. You crave going out and experiencing more things or better things or different things.
Right.
How do the Japanese, how are they able to do the same thing for generations? What is that special secret sauce that they have which keeps them doing the same thing, whereas a lot of other cultures don't believe in something like that?
Yeah, that's right. Well, maybe it's a sort of vestige of Confucianism, respect for one's elders, and filial piety. The Japanese do have a tradition. They leave everything to the eldest son. And so for the eldest son to receive everything, they have to do what the family asks them to do, and generally speaking is to maintain the family traditions. So if there's a business, then it's to run the business. If it's not a business, it's basically to look after the family's property and to honor the ancestors. So the other kids are free to leave the family. It's only the eldest.
Okay.
But then, of course, when their parents die, the eldest gets everything. So, those younger kids, they know that, and so they don't expect anything in return. I would say that's one mechanism that keeps the whole system going.
Okay. So when we talk about East Asia, Japan definitely has a very distinctive culture, and they do things in a completely different way. But what do you think? So Japan definitely developed much before South Korea or China. I mean, it developed in the early 1900s. Do you think the other two giants from East Asia, China and South Korea, they kind of like to emulate Japan, not only economically or business-wise, but also culturally? Or what do you think about that?
Yeah, well, of course, China came first thousands of years ago, and Japan basically borrowed most of its culture and its language, its written language, and many of its artisanal skills from China in the first, around the 5th century to the 8th century AD. Then, of course, China went into deterioration in the 1900s, and then basically has come zooming back. Interestingly, all three countries actually do have a reason why they developed the way they did, and that reason is essentially they had a war or revolution, and then the US was there to inject money and to invest in them. So although you mentioned that the Japanese developed actually from the 1880s with the Meiji Restoration, and sure enough, they did that without a revolution. It didn't last very long because, as you know, they became militaristic, and then that led to the disastrous events of World War II. After World War II, Japan was pummeled into, the most primitive of countries. People couldn't feed themselves, so there was a lot of starvation. Japan almost became a communist country. Not many people know that. But for about 5 years after the war, it looked like the communists would actually take over the country. But the Americans were scared or concerned about communism, and so together with the LDP and actually the local Yakuza, basically they undertook certain actions which ensured that eventually capitalism would win out. But interestingly, some of those people who believed in communism went on to enter the education system. And actually, even today, the schools teach socialist thought. So it's often said that Japan is the world's most socialist, democratic, capitalist society. So in any case, all three of the countries have similar backgrounds. Why the Japanese came back first is really an issue for history, right? I mean, after World War II, they had nothing. They had to do something to feed themselves. And so basically they formed collective units, similar to the cadets that they have today. And then they picked certain industries, automotive and semiconductors and some other things, and they focused on those things and became excellent over the following 40 years. The Koreans, they didn't have their war until 7 years later, or 5 years later with the Korean War. And, frankly speaking, I think the Americans had already gotten sick of going to war and then helping the country revive. And so they didn't put the same amount of effort in that they did in Japan. They didn't have a Marshall Plan, for example. And then with the Chinese, they, of course, had a cultural revolution which set them back tremendously, killed lots of people. And it wasn't until the Gang of Four was deposed in the 1980s that they really became free of the shackles. So it's a historical thing. I think it could quite easily have been reversed. Mm-hmm. I will say one more thing. The Japanese had their will absolutely destroyed for 3 generations after the war. The average Japanese person felt very little nationalistic pride. They were just trying to survive, basically. And for them, America wasn't sort of a unwanted victor. America became their big brother. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So it's kind of Stockholm syndrome on a national basis. They adopted America as a symbol of good. Mm-hmm. The Koreans and Chinese, on the other hand, didn't think like that. Mm-hmm. The Chinese rejected America almost straight away. And Koreans have gone their own way, and they they use America as they need it, but I don't think they feel particularly close to America. There's not that same big brother feeling that they have in Japan.
That's a lot of insights. Okay, so Terry, coming back to entrepreneurship here, and I'm going to talk about being a foreigner, living in Japan, and then creating a lot of success over there. Recently, we've seen, because of the visas, being easily granted to a lot of foreigners around the world to travel and even set up shop in different countries, there is this huge trend which has been seen basically in the last 10-15 years of global nomadic entrepreneurs. And countries like Singapore, Hong Kong to a certain extent, then in Europe it's Ireland, and down under it's New Zealand right now with the Edmund Hillary Fellowship. All these countries are trying to attract more and more talent, and there are a lot of people who want to go to these countries and set up shop. You were probably one of the first people to do that. You were leading the wave behind them. So do you think it's really a concept that a lot of people just find success not in their own country but somewhere else, and they should follow that?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to say. I don't think where you live is a defining aspect of entrepreneurship, to be honest. I mean, obviously, if you're in the US, you have a certain business culture which is good for promoting entrepreneurs. And it is easier to find funds there than it is in a place like Japan. But on the other hand, while it's easier in the US to get funds, it's also easier to go out of business and to get sued. Whereas in Japan, generally, people tend to keep their businesses, and going to court is a very rare thing. So every country has its pluses and minuses. Most non-Japanese think that Japan is hard to do. It is hard to do. There's 126 million people who are competing against you. But then, India is 1 billion people competing against you. I think India must be one of the hardest countries to be an entrepreneur, to be a successful one. So I always have respect for Indian companies who make it. But in any case, that competition is actually very healthy, because it helps you learn how to compete. It teaches you how to differentiate, how to excel. And of course, you get a great selection of manpower to make your management team out of. Mm-hmm. So there are pluses and minuses for each location. I've thought in the past about going to a place like Singapore, where they have, plenty of funding, and where funding is a way of life for the government, not just for individual angels and VCs. But at the end of the day, life is more than just raising money. Life is more than just money. And so, you have to feel like you're living a life while you're living the life, right? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Living the life, obviously, being what you want to do as a career, and living a life is, what happens around you while you're waiting for that career to happen, like having families and raising children and that kind of thing. So I would say that, all in all, Japan is not a bad place for a non-Japanese to start a company. And since we were based in Awaji, which is in Hyogo, just south of Osaka, the third largest city in Japan, Osaka actually has a startup ecosystem, which is just getting started. In fact, there's an organization called Startup Bootcamp. And at the end of last year, 30 companies attended that Startup Bootcamp. And I believe 13 or 14 of them wound up getting funding. Mm-hmm. And also wound up with some pretty significant contracts here in Japan. So that's something that I wouldn't have seen probably even 5 years ago. So I'm quite excited about the prospects for startups in a place like Japan. The money is starting to come together. Big Japanese companies are starting to, think more about bringing in outside technology and so on.
Mm. Well, that's very interesting, and also on those lines, I think Fukuoka is coming up as this tech startup hub for Japan.
There's another one as well. That's right, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. Fukuoka being a much more regional city, it's actually probably in some ways more livable. Unless you're from Mumbai or Calcutta, then possibly as an Indian person, for example, going to a place like Fukuoka actually might be quite nice. It's much more laid back, and people are very friendly there.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Okay, so as you rightly said, there has to be this very good balance between the business life and personal life definitely has a higher value to it. So, what is this ideal country that should be there, especially for millennials or new entrepreneurs, young entrepreneurs, to go there to have an ecosystem? Like, what kind of an ideal ecosystem should be there to encourage people to innovate more and create more value for a lot of problems that we are facing around the world today?
I don't think that there is a one particular country that has everything that you're looking for. I've read good things about places like Finland, Estonia. I suppose if I was a global nomadic entrepreneur, I might try one of those countries just for a bit of fun. But to be honest, the best businesses are built where there is a need for that business. And often those countries where those businesses are most needed are the countries with the least access to capital. So, even in thinking about where you're going to base your company, it may actually not be where you're going to run your business. If you're thinking about raising money and possibly getting high-grade technology people, then obviously the west coast of the USA is the center of the universe. But in terms of actually applying what it is that you use the money for, creating software, creating solutions, and that sort of thing, it could well be that those solutions and software are being applied in markets like Africa, for example, where nobody would normally think of going as an entrepreneur. And yet that's probably where the next generation of business is going to evolve from.
Absolutely. In fact, recently I read an article where Rwanda was, it became the second biggest startup ecosystem after South Africa. And that's amazing considering just that in '94 it went through one of the worst genocides in human history. And so coming to that, actually, the developing world or the middle income world, they obviously, so I come from India, I know that there are a lot of problems that we need to solve, and there are a lot of opportunities because there are a lot of problems to solve.
Yeah, sure.
But then the surrounding ecosystem or the infrastructure around you sometimes creates obstacles because those are problems, which are out of your control. And as most of the motivational speakers say, that don't focus on the things that you can control. So when you're in a system or in an area where there are things out of your control, how should an entrepreneur approach that problem?
Well, I think you're talking about resources that are not there when you need to get something done, right?
Yes.
So, of course, I've had exactly the same thing here in Japan. When I first started in the networking space, I started with a small company at that time called Novell. Novell started the local area network revolution, which eventually became the Ethernet and then Internet. I couldn't find engineers in Japan because nobody had ever heard of this thing called a local area network. I mean, we were dealing with Novell version 1, literally version 1. So basically, I found a fellow in Hong Kong who seemed to know something about networks, and he was from Mumbai. And I employed him sight unseen. At that time, we had no internet, so I just hired him over the phone. He came to Japan. He turned out really well, and I said to him, "Are there more guys like you?" And he said, "Well, yeah, actually, there's this thing called NIIT, and why don't you go and see that?" So I did, and at that time, nobody was hiring from abroad other than UAE. Yeah, you couldn't get a visa as an Indian engineer to go to America, for example. And so I went to the Institute of Technology. I met the dean. And he thought it was fascinating that some Australian fellow had shown up from Japan looking for engineers. Anyway, we ran, the guy that I hired from Hong Kong, his name was Prabhakaran and Rajiv. And I asked Rajiv to introduce his dad. He did. His dad was sort of a trader, and we used to call him KK, living in Mumbai, in Parsi Colony, actually, in the Five Gardens. So, in any case, I said to him, look, let's see if there's any of these local area network engineers here in Mumbai. So we ran a half-page ad in at that time, the Bombay Times. Mm-hmm. And I got a call a few weeks later, 2 or 3 weeks later, from the police station in Mumbai, in the Parsi Colony area, saying, oh, we have this gentleman, Mr. Prabhakaran. We think he's committing some fraud because he's running advertisements saying that a Japanese company is looking for Indian engineers. And I said, well, actually, he is. And they said, well, you have to prove that you're a company. And so I had to fax them some company documents to prove that we were an actual company, and it wasn't fraud. So anyway, the police let him go. And then he called me up a little bit later that day and said, oh, now I have a second problem. I said, okay, what? And he said, well, I've received 2-meter high stack of resumes.
2 meters?
Roughly about 2,000 resumes.
Wow.
And he said, there's no way I can get through all of these before you come over the week after next. And I said, well, look for the magic letters, three letters, L-A-N. If you can see L-A-N in the resume, just pick those ones out. So he did. There were 200 of them. So I actually interviewed, in the end, about 100 people. Mm-hmm. I chose two people. Mm-hmm. And I brought those guys to Japan. They were so fantastic. Fantastic. I mean, those guys are now running major American and European bank IT divisions elsewhere in the world. And there's actually a network of these guys who originally got work through me in Japan, and then entered the banking system, and then went on to have very good careers. So as an entrepreneur and as a nomadic entrepreneur from the point of view of where to do business, there's no such thing as a border, and there's no such thing as a lack of resources. Because I could find those engineers, my company grew at a compound of 80% a year for the next 5 years. Mm. And I wound up selling that company to EDS in 1995. Right. So I was the first foreign entrepreneur in Japan to do an earn-out, as I recall. I don't think there was anyone before me. And it was simply because I couldn't find the resources in a place where I needed them. Mm. So, what I want to say to budding entrepreneurs is that if you can find the resources all in one convenient place, there isn't enough demand for what you have that you can compete with all the other people who are tapping into the same thing. You need differentiation. You need to be the only one in your particular space or your particular area. Right. And if you are the only one, or if you're doing something completely different to make yourself the only one, then you've got something that will probably wind up working well for you later on.
Oh, that's an amazing piece of advice, Terrie.
Yeah. So look for where the gold nuggets are not where they are.
Right. Oh, that's very interesting. Okay. So what can Indians offer now to the Japanese business environment? And I've seen so many Indians already there, and people like you have realized that India-Japan have long-standing cooperation when it comes to business. So what else is there which Indians today can offer to the business environment in Japan, which it cannot find elsewhere in the world?
If I'm a young Indian entrepreneur, to be honest, I would still be interested in the US. Mm-hmm. The reason is pretty simple, because of language.
Right.
But recently, and especially in and around Pune, because it's a big base for Japanese manufacturing, mostly auto and auto parts, there has been a kind of a boom in Japanese language learning over the last 5 years. So, if you've gone that route and you've learned the language, then clearly you want to come to Japan at some point. The issue is, well, how do I get to Japan? Actually, it's as simple as hopping on an airplane and coming here. I mean, after COVID is over, of course. But Japan doesn't really have any rules against people coming in and looking around and looking for a job. They can't just suddenly get a work visa once they find that job. They have to go back home and then arrange to be checked out, and the company has to make applications on their behalf and that sort of thing. But Japan is one of the few countries in the world which is still welcoming overseas skilled workers, particularly in the IT space, engineering space, that kind of thing. So, if you speak Japanese and you have a technical skill, then that's a pretty obvious differentiator for you to come to Japan, to choose Japan over somewhere else. If I don't have Japanese, if I'm just I'm a coder and I'm looking for any job I can get in a Western country where I don't have to, I can just speak English, then obviously you're not going to choose Japan. It just wouldn't make sense. I would choose Oceania or the Americas or Europe or somewhere else.
Right.
So, Japan isn't for everyone, I have to say.
Okay. So, Terry, there's one thing that you also mentioned in our lecture in AYF when you talked about your sourdough bread diplomacy or salesmanship.
Yeah, sure.
where you invite people over. Tell us about that. So, because that is something a lot of Indians need. We are very shy when we go abroad, and we don't really understand how to mingle with a lot of people, especially the locals. So tell us about that.
Yeah. So, I was talking before about life being about color. And, of course, one of the most intense colors is food, the color of taste. So it's no surprise, there's no coincidence that people celebrate by dining together and eating together. So eating and dining is a very communal and very memorable experience, and people take those memories away, and they store them out of context to all the other noise on the planet. So I got involved in, got interested in sourdough bread, mostly because my, at that time, 15-year-old daughter was eating a lot of white bread, and I wanted her to eat something more healthy. And then I found out it tasted pretty good, and then I found out it was good for you. And then I realized that I could make it something different, and there are two things here. One is that when I tell my sales staff, because I get sales staff who ask me, how can I be a good salesperson? And my number one piece of advice is learn one thing really, really well that's interesting and have a good story to tell to your clients. So that even if they don't want to buy your product, they still want to see you because they want to hear the story. So it doesn't matter what that little thing is as long as you're really good at it. So I'm a very good storyteller, having learned that lesson long ago. So as I got into the sourdough bread, I realized there was a great story to be had around the product. And of course, I could make people remember it because I could give them a piece. And then roughly the same time, I discovered it probably 3 or 4 years ago, Japan started passing laws about bribery and corruption and so on. And so government departments and large companies can't accept gifts of value anymore. But my bread doesn't have value. It's handmade. And I don't sell it, so I'm not breaking any rules. So when I give them bread, I'm giving them something really basic, something they can accept, and something which they're thrilled to accept. And they're thrilled because my sourdough bread isn't just a Western sourdough bread. I mix Japanese ingredient into it, which is called sake kasu. And sake kasu is made from, when you make sake, and you press the moromi, the white liquid that's been fermenting for 20 days. Once the liquid has been forced out, it's what's left over. And beer, you would call it beer lees, Lees. Anyway, this sake kasu is loaded with enzymes. It's extremely good for you. It does have some alcohol in it, but the alcohol bakes off when you put it in the bread.
Right.
And I ran some experiments, and I found that around 10 to 12% sake kasu and a loaf of sourdough by volume, 10 to 12%, creates a really deep umami flavor. Really, just like eating. It's almost like cheese. It's a bread, but it tastes like cheese.
Oh.
So as a result, I say to these people, my story has been enhanced, right? Oh, I'm giving you something different. It's Western. You've never seen this before. They've never tasted sourdough. But what's special about the sourdough is it's got Japanese ingredient in it, which is very, very close to the heart of most Japanese, which is sake. Sake is a sacred drink. In fact, sake is a sacred drink for births and deaths and marriages. That's what they drink in those ceremonies. So for them to find out that I included a Japanese ingredient and essentially a quintessential Western food is really fascinating and really interesting. And then it allows them to tell their friends your story. So they can't wait to share the bread with the other people in the office. So I started doing business with a regional government about 18 months ago, and I took down my first 2 loaves of bread. They cut it up at the office there and then and fed it to about 20 people.
Wow.
So I became known as the bread guy. The sake kasu bread guy. You know, most people didn't know that I was the tourism advisor for the prefecture, and I was actually on the payroll. But they knew me as the bread guy, the foreign bread guy. So, as a result, every time I met somebody, the first thing that happened is their faces would light up, big smile, and they'd say, "You're the bread guy. That was so good. It was delicious." No better way to start a relationship.
That's amazing recall.
So, you can melt people's hearts by doing that. And actually, the Prabhakarans I mentioned previously, so the son and his wife came to Japan and they integrated into Japan really well. The wife did a fantastic job of getting to know the neighbors by cooking for them. And all of the neighbors were addicted to Indian meals because she was so good at it. Yeah. So, cooking, food, extremely memorable, extremely basic, and it's something different, and yet very humble, right? I mean, I'm not doing anything over the top. I'm not showing up in a Ferrari. I'm not giving people gold coins. I'm just giving them a piece of bread. But it's a piece of bread I make with my own hands. And so that sort of humble act makes them appreciate it, remember it, and talk about it. So that's my bread diplomacy.
Amazing. Okay, Terrie, so before we wind up, I want some inside scoop from you. Japan Travel is the leading Japan, website, Japanese website for traveling to Japan and other things.
Yes.
Last year, 32 million people, almost 32 million people visited Japan, foreigners.
Right.
This year, the Olympics was supposed to be there. Our big government said around 40 million should visit, but everything is not happening according to plan, obviously.
Right.
What do you think is going to happen to the tourism industry? How it's going to rebound next year? What are your projections? What do you think about how we're going to come out of this? Especially with the quarantine laws against Chinese and South Koreans, which are primarily the major foreigners who come to Japan.
Well, personally, I think that China, at least, will be allowed to travel back to Japan sooner rather than later. I would say probably October, November this year, be my guess. The number of tourists who will come to Japan this year will be probably less than 6 million people, would be, again, my guess. So that is 20% of the last year's. Probably it's going to take 2 years for the space to recover, and some companies are going to go bankrupt before that happens. We won't be one of them because we're diversified. We're also building software to make ourselves even more efficient than we are already, and so I believe that we'll come out of it as leaders. It's not really an issue of the size of the market, it's an issue of market share. So if you can improve your competitiveness, even in a small market, you can still do very well. So that's certainly my objective. So anyway, I think probably 6 million people this fiscal year. Next fiscal year, maybe 10 to 15 million. And then maybe the year after, a recovery to 25 to 30 million. Then from there, we have a big expo in Osaka in 2025, and that should be a boom year again.
So do you think the Olympics are coming back to Japan? Or are they going to happen in 2022?
I think the Japanese government has until March to prove to the world that Japan is safe. If it can do that, then the Olympics will occur. But to do that, the problem is that the Japanese government has studiously ignored gathering facts and data. And so in the absence of facts and data, they're allowing people to come in small numbers. And if they go home and they don't get infections traveling with them, then by that means they will be able to prove that Japan is safe.
Great.
So a lot is going to happen over the next 7 or 8 months. If they can't prove to the world that it's safe by February, March, the Olympics will not happen.
Well, I certainly hope that they do happen in Japan. Things go back to normal. Well, there you go, guys. So this was Terrie Lloyd, and he's shared with us so many insights about the entrepreneurial lifestyle and how to be a successful person, where you don't think about business and money all the time, but give importance to other more important things in life. If you have any comments and feedback, just put it in the comments below, and do subscribe to the channel. If you want to ask Terrie anything, as he said, you can reach out to him, or you can reach out to me, and I can definitely connect you both. Well, thank you so much, Terrie, for agreeing to do this interview. It was an amazing time.
Thanks. Yeah, appreciate it.